freshly brewed and ready to go. You're listening to Espression with Ishita and Alejandro.
No script, no filters, just two friends and a lot of caffeine.
Welcome to today's conversation. Let's talk about the bag.
When you're standing in the aisle or browsing a roaster site, you aren't just looking at packaging. You're looking at a map of 1,000 tiny variables.
Every label tells a story, from the processing methods used on Costa Rican hillsides to the specific language of roast profiles and flavor notes. In this episode of Espression, we're stripping away the jargon to decode the anatomy of the bean.
We'll navigate the technicalities of labels, touching on species, origins, and the mystery of processing, before exploring the tension between the prestige of a specialty coffee and the ultimate convenience of the pod or the instant cup.
Finally, we look toward the horizon to discuss the future of the industry, from the ethics of global sourcing to the environmental challenges threatening our favorite varieties. Is our coffee culture truly sustainable, or is the best cup a moving target?
So, check your roast date, preheat your mug, and let's dial it in. So, welcome to episode 3 of Espression. Today we're going to talk about how to choose your coffee. First, we will talk about coffee labels. So you notice how when you go to the supermarket, there's all of these bags, all these choices of coffee that you have. And it starts with the brand or the roaster. That's the main thing that you see when you go and buy a coffee. But then there's these other different variables, like whether or not it's a blend or a single origin. That means whether or not it comes from one place or multiple places and it's all blended into one. The species, so usually there's two main species in coffee, which are Arabica and Robusta, and they have different characteristics. Robusta is definitely more bitter and darker, while Arabica is considered to be the more high quality species, but it's also harder to produce, so it's usually more expensive. Like the method, whether or not rather than the way that the coffee was processed in order to be delivered as a hard bean or grounds. And then there's also these wordings which help you get an idea of what the coffee is going to taste like, kind of a subjective explanation, and it really means different things to different people, but it's an idea. The type of roast is also quite important. So there's light roasts, medium roasts, and dark roasts. Usually, specialty coffees are considered to be medium roast. That means the roast means how much roasting there was during the process. So how the time that the coffee was roasted for. So a darker coffee is usually darker and more bitter in terms of texture and flavor. So, Ishita, the first question to begin is, I think, do you have any preference when it comes to these variables? What do you like to go for?
Well, I think there's a lot to consider here, and I think you've summed it up very nicely. What all is on a label, and when you pick out a coffee, if you're into that kind of thing, what all you're going to consider, all these factors. Personally, for me, in terms of the brand or roaster, I actually, I was just thinking while you were talking, I've actually not considered the roaster part of it as much. I think I always look at a particular brand and I'm drawn to it. That's probably good marketing getting to me, I think, where I'm just, I know that a particular brand is going to be good. I usually go for the same brand. I know it's going to be like, I know what to expect. But yeah, the roaster part of it is something that I have actually not considered that much. In terms of blend and single origin, I think it's easier and more popular to find coffee blends, if I'm not wrong, and I think that is what I've come across more, and I've grown a fan of it, definitely. What do you prefer? Do you prefer a blend or a single origin?
Yeah, I think it's ultimately, when it comes to these variables, I would just say try it and figure out if you like it or not, because there's a lot of differences also in the way that, I mean, you can get a washed method of processing with, like, I don't know, floral notes and a dark roast, but ultimately there's also so many other variables that go under those that you don't see, and you can only know whether or not you like it until you try it. So I think a lot of times, like, personally, I would say, okay, I like medium roasts and dark roasts because they're more bitter. Light roasts are too light for me, and that's a good pointer. But I think I would usually not have that strict of a preference. I would just try it, and if it looks interesting and if it sounds interesting, then I would give it a try. But I know that they can definitely help. Like, I know, for example, washed methods. So just to give a little bit of context there's 3 different types of methods of processing. Well, there's also multiple, but there's 3 main ones. The washed method is the method where the coffee cherry has all of the layers, or the main outer layers, removed. So the skin, the flesh, and the mucilage. This is common with Kenyan coffees or coffees in Africa, and it has the particular characteristic that it uses up a lot of water, and that's why it's called washed. Natural processed coffees are dried with most of the cherry, and this is more common in Latin America or Brazilian coffees. And then there's this other third method, which is also becoming quite popular, which is the honey method, which is a hybrid method where the mucilage layer, which is one of the inner layers, is left, but the outer skin is removed. And there's also different colors, quote unquote, of honey, depending on how much is removed. But ultimately, like, you could say, okay, natural coffees are more acidic usually. But I mean, you can tell me, okay, I don't really like acidic coffee, so I'm not going to go for a natural coffee. But I would say don't stick to all of these variables. Try to experiment and try to figure out what you like.
Yeah, that's right. And I think when it comes to picking your coffee, there's also a lot of flavor notes that we have written on these packaging, coffee packaging. I think that itself is quite subjective, because what it says on the packet is not something that everyone is going to experience. I think it still depends on how you experience your coffee, although I'm not saying that those flavor notes are completely meaningless. They have been, they give you a certain idea of what to expect, but it's important to realize that you're not going to taste everything exactly the way it says on the packaging. And that is also something that's quite interesting, because then you get to have your own sort of perception of the taste of a coffee. Going back to the processing methods, Alejandro, you mentioned the honey method. So in this method, am I right to assume that there's no actual honey being used in the method, is there?
Oh, no, of course not. I actually am not sure why it's called honey. And fun fact, it was actually a method that was invented in Costa Rica, but now it's becoming more popular precisely because of that mixture of flavors between something like a washed method where all of the cherry is removed, or all of the outer layers of the cherry are removed, and one where all of the layers are left. And that's why there's different kinds of honey, but no, it has nothing to do with honey, as in like bees or... Yeah.
That's very interesting, yeah.
And I agree with you on the flavor notes, to be honest. Like, I feel like it's kind of a subjective thing, and it means different things to different people. And that's also another common misconception. So sometimes people say, oh, this coffee has chocolate notes, so they think they have chocolate, like the coffee has chocolate as well. And some coffees have like this flavoring, like artificial flavoring added, but it doesn't mean that the coffee has fruits if it says fruity, or wood if it says woody. It's more of an idea of, oh, it's darker, it's more bitter, it has this earthy, it's kind of like perfumes in that way where it's kind of subjective.
Yeah. Speaking of that, perfumes, I've actually bought coffee beans which have been sprayed with flavorings, and I don't know how much it actually affected the flavor of the coffee, but there were like so many different flavors where it was like chocolatey coffee and this coffee and that coffee, And when I researched about it, it was actually that it was regular coffee beans sprayed with a kind of flavoring, so it adds those flavors. But that is definitely, I think it's a spin-off on, seeing what you can do with your coffee. It's definitely something that you're welcome to try it, and it's a different type of experience. And but definitely the flavor notes that we're talking about here are more about what you taste naturally in the coffee and not what it has been sort of blended with in terms of flavor. But there are coffees that do that, and they add those extra flavors. But yeah, I think that's a lot of different variables to consider while picking out your coffee and your tastes and what kind of beans, what kind of origin. That makes it really interesting. Honestly, picking out your coffee is not as simple as going to a store and just looking at a brand as I was doing earlier. But there's a lot that goes into it.
For sure. And wow, sprayed coffees. That's something I've never seen before. Definitely need to try them. But okay, That was all for this act of espression, and we will be right back.
Okay, so welcome to Psych Dose. This is a segment where I will be sharing fun facts about coffee and how it is related to our psychology. So we've been talking a lot about beans and roast profiles, but I want to take a quick detour into what this stuff is actually doing to your personality. Because biologically speaking, caffeine is basically a master of gaslighting.
Wow, that's a really strong
caffeine.
Okay.
Well, it really is. Caffeine doesn't actually give you energy. It's a molecular imposter. Your brain naturally builds up a molecule called adenosine throughout the day. Think of it as a sleep juice. The more it builds up, the more your brain says, hey, we're tired, let's go to bed. But caffeine is shaped exactly like that sleep molecule. It rushes into your brain and plugs the receptors like a fake key in a lock. It doesn't turn the engine on, it just prevents the off switch from being flipped. So you aren't actually energized, you're just a tired person who's being tricked into thinking they're a superhero.
Wow, so the caffeine just kind of blocks you from feeling tired, even though you keep being tired?
Yeah, basically, it's tricking you into thinking you're not tired, but you actually are. And it gets weirder for our psychology. Caffeine is also a hype man for your dopamine, which is why that first cup feels like a warm hug. It can also trigger what psychologists call pseudo-anxiety. Caffeine kicks your fight or flight response into gear. Your heart rate goes up, your breathing gets shallow, your brain, which is always trying to find a reason for how we feel, looks around and goes, oh, my heart is racing. I must be terrified of that email I just got. But you're not actually anxious. You're just overly caffeinated and your brain is looking for someone to blame.
Wow, this gives a whole new meaning to the song Espresso.
But it's not all bad news. While it might make you a little paranoid about your inbox, long-term coffee drinkers actually win. A massive Harvard study found that moderate coffee drinkers are 20% less likely to suffer from depression. So as long as you aren't vibrating out of your seat, your morning ritual is actually a pretty solid mental health tool.
I agree on that. I always like having my morning coffee.
Do not talk to me before I've had my cup of coffee in the morning.
Okay, I will make a note of that.
Yeah, but your coffee is doing a lot more than what we think it is, and it's also not exactly giving you energy, but more masking your tiredness and also hyping you up. So I think coffee is a good friend to have around. I wouldn't complain.
Me neither. Well, anyways, that was all for this break, and we will be right back with Espression. We are back with Espression. Now we will talk about specialty coffee, which is a term that seems to be thrown around quite a lot these days. So first, we'll begin by introducing what specialty coffee is, or at least the more general definition of it. So there's something called the Specialty Coffee Association, and they score a coffee on a scale of 0 to 100. Specialty coffee is usually the one that gets scored 80 or above. But honestly, nowadays it's more of a generic term that is connected to high quality, the highest of qualities of coffees. And then depending on where you go, you can get served specialty coffee. So you'll see it as a term that's used a lot in coffee shops that basically put it in their marketing to say that they care about coffee and that they source their coffee from high quality sources. This one compares to non-specialty coffees, which are lower quality coffees, and it's what you will usually find at your Starbucks or Costa or Dunkin' or Tim Hortons or all of these big coffee chains, multinational coffee chains that are more focused on a balance of different things and convenience and just being next to you always. So yeah, that's basically something that you'll come across when you go to coffee shops and when you are into this world of coffee. Honestly, I think in the end it just comes down to quality or convenience. So I don't know, personally for me, even though I appreciate the taste, the flavors of coffee, and I care about quality in my coffee, sometimes you just want a pumpkin spice latte with two shots of Starbucks syrup. Caramel syrup, yeah. Caramel frappuccino sometimes. I don't know. I could play both sides, to be honest. What about you, Ishita?
I mean, I'm quite surprised that the specialty coffee, like it has an actual association deciding what is supposed to be specialty coffee, because I feel like we hear that term so often these days. Either all coffee shops have acquired specialty coffee, or it's just something that maybe people are not considering as much when they use that term. But it's definitely interesting to note that what we see here is that these mass-produced sort of these coffee chains that we see, which are more popular, and I think they're using like the same kind of coffee everywhere, are more that are on the non-specialty side. And I mean, I can imagine why they are working on a much larger scale, and it must be very difficult to have specialty coffee being supplied to all your stores around the world and maintain a particular standard. But you're right. I mean, it's something that you consider. Like, I personally think that when I go to a local coffee shop, I will think about specialty coffee and trying to try different types of coffees. But when I go to a Starbucks or a Costa coffee or something, I usually have the same order, and I'm going to go for that same drink, not so much because of the quality of the coffee or anything, but because of what it tastes like, and I've got certain memories associated with it, and I just want to relive that memory. So I think we all have those kinds of things where we pick out what to consider in which moment. And speaking of, we also have another contender in a way, which is instant coffee. I mean, there's a lot of instant coffee out there, which is something that's super convenient when we consider it's instant. And I know there's not much room to consider quality here, but it's definitely very convenient. What do you think about instant coffees?
Yeah, so I think we talked about this last episode. And yeah, I feel like in the end it all comes down to your balance between how fast do I want it and how much am I willing to sacrifice in terms of flavor or sourcing or quality. Personally, I think in the end, it all comes down to your own choice and your own situation. And as you said, like, You said sometimes I need to get a coffee quickly because I'm at work. So these more efficient methods definitely do the job better.
Yeah.
So one thing to add with specialty coffee as well, which some people might be wondering or might have this question of where can I actually get it? And first of all, as you said, your local coffee shop, independent places that care about coffee, that have different methods, that's what they sell, right? You go there because you want a good, high quality coffee drink. And it's also a good way of supporting a local business. Then there's also these roasters, which usually have brands. Some of them have stores, physical stores, but most of them are not that popular or like mass market. So they usually have specific websites or specific social media contacts where you can get specialty coffee. Usually they'll tell you the farm, the producers, the people that are behind the label, and it's a good way of also supporting people from all over the world because there's, of course, in the regions where coffee is produced, but definitely from different countries and different regions and different areas. So that's also another interesting thing that I've learned in the past few years is to know that there's so many places and all these farms that their livelihood is supported by people having their morning coffee. And that to me started to become a lot more important to know. Like it started with a curiosity of, oh, where does this actually come from? And to be able to know, oh, it comes from this farm in this very specific country is actually really interesting and really powerful. How it's also a way of impacting lives in different parts of the world.
Yeah, I think it definitely elevates your experience of having coffee. It takes it from a simple caffeine boost or like, people who like coffee taste, going from that to like appreciating where the journey of that coffee in a way, where it's come from, what went into producing it, and how it's ended up in your cup, in a nice cup of coffee that you're enjoying. So I think that's definitely something that it makes the experience of drinking coffee more interesting in a way. It goes from being a simple routine activity to a meaningful ritual that we can appreciate and enjoy. So we've talked about specialty coffee a lot. I wonder, with the specialty coffee, do we actually know what criteria they use to label a coffee a specialty coffee? I mean, what kind of markers do we have any idea of that?
Well, that's where it starts to be a little bit more of a subjective thing. It's kind of like dog walking contests, where there's these words like, okay, yeah, how deep the flavor is, how much you can taste. It's also kind of like wine, where like wine is rated. But ultimately, and this is, I think, the main takeaway from all of this is, I feel like the more that you try different things, the more you realize that it really is all subjective. At least that's my take on it, and I know that people might have another opinion, and they might say, oh, this one sucks. And yeah, there's definitely markers that you don't want, like, for example, flavorless, or coffees that don't actually taste that much like coffee because maybe they're mixed with something else. But I would argue that past a certain standard, the differences that you notice are more of, oh, this tastes a little bit different, more than this tastes better. And yeah, there's definitely different opinions on this, and that's why there's a scale. But I think the scale really is kind of subjective, like in a lot of these other products, again, like wine or water even. Like there's people that taste and rate water. Like I would say, well, as long as it tastes like water and it doesn't taste like metals, then it's still water. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can leave it up to the Specialty Coffee Association to decide what exactly is specialty coffee, as long as we enjoy our cups and we find what we are comfortable with, what we enjoy. And yeah, we all have different preferences, and I think that's the most beautiful thing about it. All right, so let's move on to a break.
So welcome to the segment called Bean Theory. In this segment, I will give a fun fact, fun curiosity about the topic at hand, in this case, coffee. Today's fact is that instant coffee does not have that much caffeine compared to other methods. So if you're having instant coffee because you just want a quick caffeine boost, it might require a lot more coffee in order to get the same amount of caffeine than you can get with other methods. What do you think about that, Ishita?
That's quite interesting. I mean, when you think about instant coffee, you think about the instant caffeine boost that you're getting as well, because it's quick, it's on the go. But I think what I'm gathering from this is the more effort you're willing to put into your coffee with coffee grounds or beans, the more caffeine you're going to get out of it. So it's definitely something quite interesting. I'm assuming that it's all the processing that instant coffee goes through that makes the caffeine content a bit lower. Is that what happens? Do you have any idea?
Partly, yeah, because I know most instant coffees are freeze-dried, so the way that their process involves freezing the coffee itself, and yeah, then it's also the whole instantification, where you could just have this powder that just dissolves. So yeah, that's part of it, and also depending on the method as well, because there's some methods that extract more caffeine than others. So yeah, just a fun fact, like because I've seen a lot of my friends who drink a lot of instant coffee, and I've wondered why are they drinking so much of it, where I feel like I have one little espresso shot and I'm already all caffeinated. And that's part of the reason why.
Yeah, that definitely tracks. I mean, I think it also depends on the weight of coffee. I mean, with instant coffee, you put 1 or 2 teaspoons, and when it comes to ground coffee, you definitely put a lot more because you measure it and everything, and that has to make quite a difference as well in how much caffeine we're getting out of it.
That is very true. But anyways, this was Bean Theory. We will be right back with Espression.
Okay, welcome to our final segment, which is the future of coffee. As we see different methods coming up, different styles of coffee, you've got your different speeds of getting coffee out of a machine or whatever. I think there's a lot to consider going into the future of coffee. And the first thing that comes to mind would be the convenience factor. We've got your quick machines that give you a very nice cup of coffee very quickly, like your Nespresso or an instant coffee machine, in which you press a few buttons and you can get a cappuccino or a latte or an Americano, whichever you'd prefer. There's a lot to consider here, and there's also the slower methods where you have your espresso machines, which take some time, and you've got V60 and you've got your French presses. All of these are much slower. So Alejandro, what do you think? Which one do you prefer, and what do you think is the way forward?
I think it depends on people's lifestyle and how their life is organized, how their days are organized. There might be certain days where you have to rush to get somewhere early, and in that case, I would definitely say, okay, then you should look for something that fits your lifestyle, like one of these instant coffee machines or the Nespresso pods one. Now, there's, of course, definitely like different other aspects to consider, especially, I would say, with Nespresso, the whole environmental aspect of it. how to recycle the pods and all the issues that have popped up around that. But ultimately, I would say, okay, if it works for you, then go for it. And I think it's kind of like, and now I know this is going to be a weird segue, but it's kind of like music, where personally, for me, one of the hobbies that I've gone into in the past years has been vinyl record collecting. And to some people, it sounds really weird, like vinyl record collecting, isn't that outdated? But you'd be surprised, the vinyl market for new records has grown a lot in the past few years, and now every time an album comes out, it is very likely to be also released on vinyl. And it's a weird concept to think that, okay, why is there being a vinyl resurgence in 2026? I think it's because people are starting to appreciate a more slower way of living.
Yeah.
Or sometimes in contrast with a very fast way of living. And there's definitely a whole cultural debate that can be had around this topic. But personally, I've found that sometimes, even though I would say, okay, 90% of the music that I listen to, maybe even more, maybe like 99% of music that I listen to is on streaming services. So on my car and at home, playlists, all of these ways of, or all these moments, the music that I listen to is usually streaming. But there's this 1% of the time where I would definitely appreciate to sit down and listen to an album on a record, with all of its flaws and all of its issues. So I think it depends. It depends on a lot of stuff. It depends on what you value or what you don't value. It depends on if you want an experience or if you want something that solves the problem now. But it is interesting that I think as a society, we are definitely moving towards, or increasingly more people are valuing a more slower way of living. And even if it's not for the majority of the time, it definitely is for some time. And I think that is definitely something that should not be ignored going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it boils down to whether you're having coffee to energize yourself before you go for work or anything, you've got a meeting, or is it because you really like the taste of coffee and it brings you a lot of pleasure. And that also reminds me of a lot of new entrants into the market, which are like snacks with caffeine infused in them. You've got chocolates with caffeine, and you've got these like different on-the-go snacks that just give you a quick caffeine boost. And I think that's very good for people who are on the go and want a caffeine boost. But I think if you want to enjoy your coffee, then it definitely, like a vinyl record, you sit down and you make a nice cup of coffee, nice and slow, and you enjoy it. That also brings us to sorry, did you have anything to say?
Well, there is one, like you're talking about these snacks, and I think we have to consider the question of why people drink coffee. Is it for the caffeine only, or is it because of the taste? And in that case, I would say that moving forward, I wouldn't be surprised to see these snacks or drinks being even more popular, because they might be a quicker way of getting caffeine with people who are only interested in coffee because of that caffeine, but they don't really care that much for the taste.
Yeah, definitely. I think, moving forward, it all depends on what is convenient for people, but also I feel like people are getting quite more, I'd say they're more proactive about where coffee comes from and what impact it has on communities and on environment, which brings us to even talking about the human factor of coffee, which is the sourcing of coffee. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so there's a statistic that says that 60% of global supply of coffee comes from small farmers. And also this, it's really important thing, because it means that production is distributed among different small places. And also the changes in the market, of course, will affect how countries or regions produce coffee and fight against things like climate change or labor shortages. So, for example, I see it in my country, in Costa Rica, where historically one of the main exports of the country was coffee. But Costa Rica is quite a small country, and we can't really compete in terms of quantity. We don't have that much land or that many people in order to support the increasing requirements and demand for coffee worldwide. So we had to evolve, and our farmers have had to evolve to compete in the quality market before the quantity market. It's just adapting to the market, adapting to the situations. But also there's this huge issue with the labor. So there used to be an important part of the population who worked at these farms, but as the country develops and as people in society changes, there's just not enough people who are doing this anymore. And so sometimes there's some farms that have even lost production because of that labor shortage. And I was talking to someone who works at one of these places a couple of weeks ago. And it's also part of the whole societal aspect of how an increasing demand on another side of the world ultimately affects people on the other side of the world. There's also the cost of hiring people, which definitely has gone up here. And so I think moving forward, all these questions definitely, like, as if the world wants more coffee, then it needs to find ways of balancing them, because coffee producing countries and regions have their own challenges as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that when we talk about sustainability, it's not just about the environment, but it's also about how it affects livelihoods and communities, like you said. How sustainable it is to keep carrying on with a particular industry in a way that it still supports the people who are involved in it and benefits people, as many people as it can, which also brings us to the environmental factor of coffee. We see that the land which is available for growing coffee, like you said, in Costa Rica, it's a smaller country, but I think even globally it's shrinking. That land is shrinking, and global warming is also affecting a lot of regions where coffee is grown. Would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so according to NPR, the land suitable for coffee producing and growing is projected to shrink by 50% by 2050.
Wow.
This is a consequence of different factors. Main one is global warming and climate change. It also diseases to the Arabica plant and problems with sustaining farms with the Arabica plant, which are right now this is the species of the coffee plant that is considered to be the high quality species in terms of compared to Robusta, which is a lower quality one in terms of flavor. And this will, like all these limitations and new issues, will affect the yield. So again, this in the global market means that if demand increases, or even if it holds to the state that it is right now, eventually we'll have less land to produce. And this, what this means is that it's also going to, the price of coffee is also going to increase. So the main question I think that we have moving forward is, can the coffee industry sustain the demand and sustain the supply to cover the demand in the mid-long term? And I think that's definitely going to be more of an issue. And I think coffee prices have already gone up a lot in the past 3-4 years after COVID. And I wouldn't be surprised if they keep going up, because there's just all of these changes are definitely going to affect this crop and ultimately how the world reacts to it and what they have to pay for coffee.
Yeah, that's definitely a major factor to consider going forward. the environmental aspect of it, how climate change is affecting coffee, and what kinds of coffees, like you said, the Arabica varieties are being affected more. There's all of these things to consider, and but at the end of the day, we've talked about all of these factors, and I think they all would go into your choice of coffee. I know that once I am now aware of these things, of all from everything from the roasts, the brands, the beans, to the method that's been used to process the coffee, to the kind of impact it has on communities and the environment. I think I'm definitely going to consider these factors when I buy my next cup of coffee, and hopefully I would make a choice that is the best suitable for me and the people who are involved in the coffee industry, and hopefully you are able to do the same as well.
For sure, I think there's definitely a lot to see, and we have definitely covered a lot this episode. So, yeah, that was a good way of ending this series, I think.
Definitely. Well, thanks for joining in, and enjoy your cup of coffee.
Cling, cling. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
As we let the last drops of our mini-series settle, we've reached the crema, the rich culmination of our journey. Today, we demystified the coffee label, from the molecular gaslighting of caffeine that tricks our brains into feeling like superheroes, to the intricate honey and wash processing methods that define our favorite flavor profiles.
We also looked toward the horizon, discussing the vinyl resurgence of slow-brewed coffee in a world of high-speed snacks, and the sobering reality of the industry's future. With suitable land for Arabica projected to shrink by 50% by 2050, the choices we make today, supporting local roasters and understanding the human story behind the bean, have never been more vital.
As you sip your next cup, remember that coffee is more than just a caffeine boost. It's a global ritual that connects your morning to a farmer's livelihood half a world away.